Deep within a shadowy cavern, the rhythmic clang of metal on stone resonated through the oppressive darkness. A white-haired young man suddenly froze mid-swing, his eyes catching faint, blue droplets seeping through a ceiling crack. His breath hitched as excitement ignited his eyes. At last, he'd found what he was searching for. Carefully, he held up a glass bottle, letting the glowing liquid drip inside. Recognizing it immediately as ink, he glanced at the small, black cat perched on his shoulder, offering a quiet thanks. Without Nero's keen help, this discovery would never have been possible. Turning toward the pale light at the cave's entrance, he pondered what this ink could truly mean. If he brought it back, maybe the pioneering corps would finally acknowledge him. With that burgeoning hope in mind, he exited the cave, stepping onto a bleak, gray wasteland. Far in the distance stood a dazzling city, radiant and alive within its shining walls. Cheers erupted as elite warriors, known as colorists, made their grand entrance. Their vividly colored hair marked them as true heroes. Nearby citizens spoke with admiration, praising the team for slaying yet another giant monster. As long as these formidable warriors existed, they believed the city would remain protected. The atmosphere shifted abruptly to the Shadow District, where dim streets replaced bright towers. A line of applicants waited outside a building, a notice board, declaring the entrance exam for the C rank. Pioneering Corps, stating that anyone with color could apply. Suddenly, the white-haired, young man was hurled out of the building, crashing hard onto the ground. Two examiners stood above him, one shouting that someone like him had no place there. Gritting his teeth, the young man pushed himself up, and held out the bottle of blue ink, demanding an explanation. He insisted this ink proved his worth. The examiner sneered, pointing a finger at him, spelling out the harsh truth without mercy. He was rejected, simply for being colorless. In this world, he mockingly explained, one's role was fixed at birth, and this boy had no right to challenge it. The red-haired examiner released a pulse of crimson energy, cursing him as a worthless, colorless being. The force slammed into the young man, forcing a painful groan from his lips, as he collapsed to one knee. From the top of the stairs, the examiner continued his arrogant lecture, his face etched with absolute arrogance. He claimed that only people chosen, like himself, could ever become true pioneers. Beyond the city lay the Black Lands, he said, a nightmare realm, where the weak were devoured by darkness and savage creatures. Only true pioneers dared to explore those treacherous lands, gathering resources and fighting monsters, so humanity could survive. They were heroes, and the boy before him could never be one. Returning to the present, the examiner's voice turned cold. For someone without color, achieving greatness was simply impossible. He ordered the boy to accept his place, to stick to lowly labor, and never return, with a final, chilling threat, promising death if he disobeyed. The door slammed shut. Left alone, the young man lowered his head. A soft rustling came from inside his coat, as Nero peeked out, blinking curiously. The boy stroked the cat's head and spoke gently, saying they could just try another place. He was used to rejection by now. Even so, he forced a small, stubborn smile, and whispered a promise to Nero and himself, that he would one day become the greatest colorist. Quickly, he tucked the cat back inside, wary of being seen. He wandered through the industrial streets, unsure where to go next, quietly, hoping there was somewhere that would accept them. What he didn't realize was that a green-haired man was watching him from above. Later, amidst a bustling plaza, the young man thumbed through a worn notebook. With a frustrated sigh, he struck out yet another location. Every page screamed rejection. Exhausted, he stared at the list, finally admitting defeat. With no better option left, he paused before a modest building, marked Marie Workshop. Muttering he had no choice, he pushed the door open and called out inside. A white-haired girl, wearing goggles, looked up and greeted him with a bright smile. Pushing her glasses up her nose, she immediately noticed his gloomy mood, and guessed the outcome as Nero leaped onto the table. She happily greeted the cat as well. Trying to lift his spirits, she insisted the examiners were blind to his talent. The young man shook his head, asking what talent truly mattered. When no one would ever accept a colorless person, Mari countered, that the fact he repeatedly survived the Black Lands and brought back resources was proof enough. He replied modestly, saying he only managed it because Nero helped him. Changing topics, he set the bottle of blue ink on the table and asked if she wanted to buy it. Marie's eyes sparkled as she agreed, immediately offering a generous price. She poured the ink into a connected pipe system, grumbling about how expensive ink had become due to shortages. The young man commented that this scarcity was exactly why people were calling for more pioneers. A glance at the machinery made it clear that the city's life depended on these vibrant fluids. Annoyed by the unfairness of it all, Mari asked if he had reconsidered her earlier suggestion. When he hesitated, She slammed a flyer onto the table, and snapped that he couldn't afford to be picky. The paper advertised recruitment for the S-rank, Dawn Pioneering Corps, boldly stating that their entrance test was open to everyone, and judged purely on skill. The young man stared at the notice, stunned. He admitted he'd always avoided applying. He was utterly convinced he'd fail. Could a corps like that truly recognize his abilities? Marie, however, urged him to try. She insisted that if the test solely measured skill, this could be his shot. She smiled warmly, reminding him that becoming a colorist had always been his dream. A memory surfaced. Him as a child, alone in the rain, clasping Nero tightly. That dream had never faded. Marie promised her unwavering support, no matter what. Strengthened by her unwavering faith, the young man finally smiled. Gripping the flyer firmly, he resolved to hesitate no longer. He waved goodbye to Marie, and stepped out of the workshop, truly resolved. Burning brighter than ever before, moving silently through the dark, back streets of the Shadow District, the protagonist clutched the recruitment flyer, reminding himself to prepare carefully for the upcoming test. Without warning, he suddenly stopped. Nero suddenly stiffened, nestled in his clothes, reacting to something lurking behind them. A calm voice echoed from the darkness, casually asking, "What's wrong?" At that very moment, a hand emerged from the shadows, gripping a wooden staff, crowned with a glowing green crystal. The green-haired man, who'd been observing him, stepped forward, raising the staff. As a magical targeting sigil, locked onto the protagonist's back, the attack struck instantly. A sharp blade of green energy tore forward. The protagonist spun around in alarm, but his reaction was fatally slow. The spell struck him squarely, tearing through his body, and forcing a guttural scream of pain from his throat. As he collapsed onto the stone ground, the green-haired man approached with his companion, looking down at him without a shred of emotion. He mocked the boy, remarking that, although he'd narrowly avoided instant death, it made no difference. He'd die soon regardless. Blood pooled beneath the protagonist as he lay there, helpless, listening as the man coldly stated, "The death of a colorless person. It simply wouldn't matter to anyone." His strength rapidly fading, the protagonist weakly whispered for Nero. Seeing the cat's terrified face, peeking out from his clothes, he forced himself to move, just enough to urge Nero to escape, using the last of his energy to shield him. The scene then shifts to an ominous industrial zone, riddled with warning signs for toxic ink waste disposal. Groaning, the protagonist slowly came to, only to find the sinister green-haired man looming over him, a wicked smile twisting his lips. He was roughly lifted by the collar and dangled over a vast, gaping pit, filled with thick, putrid black sludge. The attacker let out a cruel, chilling laugh, muttering it was unfortunate to be tossed in, while still clinging to life. He chillingly explained that the pit held only discarded ink waste, a highly corrosive substance that dissolved anything it touched, ensuring absolutely no trace remained. Panicking, the protagonist struggled weakly against his grip, and frantically demanded to know who this man was, and why he had been targeted. The green-haired man then casually revealed that earlier, while spying on him from afar, they had been utterly shocked. Not by the boy himself, but by what he was so carefully hiding. A brief, unsettling memory surfaced, showing the two observers, fixating their attention on the mysterious creature, concealed deep inside his jacket. The man went on to explain that, a being intelligent enough to form a bond with a human, was an extraordinarily rare find, calling the cat a priceless, unparalleled discovery. He tightened his menacing grip on the protagonist's throat. Behind him, his assistant then raised a small, sinister cage. Inside it, Nero cried out pitifully in distress. Pure horror washed over the protagonist's face, as he realized his beloved companion had already been cruelly captured. In a surge of desperation, the protagonist seized the man's collar, and screamed for him to immediately release Nero. The attacker barely flinched, scoffing dismissively at the boy's futile fury, his eyes glinting with unbridled greed. He then declared that such a valuable creature was utterly wasted. On such a colorless owner, Nero would fetch an enormous price on the black market. Easily. With sickening ease, the man overpowered him completely, lifting him further off the ground while ruthlessly choking him, sneering that the pet deserved a far better master, dangling, completely helpless. He cursed himself for letting his guard down. All this in the grim Shadow District. Memories of a lonely past flooded his mind. He'd endured rejection and discrimination, all his life long, but losing Nero? That he absolutely refused to accept. Nero was his one and only family. A potent surge of rage erupted within him. He warned the man not to underestimate him, then clamped down on the attacker's arm. With all his remaining strength, the green-haired man suddenly froze, his expression twisting from arrogance to alarm, as strange energy crackled across his face. A swirling, Green aura was forcibly drawn out of his body, flowing straight into our protagonist's hands. The man screamed in terror, overwhelmed by the sensation of something being ripped right away from him. Panicked, he violently shook the boy loose and hurled him backward into the vat of toxic ink waste. Calling the whole encounter a waste of time, the attackers turned away. Nero cried desperately from within the cage as they declared their newfound wealth and left for the black market, ignoring the cat's cries entirely. Sinking beneath the dark liquid, our protagonist watched the light fade away. Nero's voice grew distant as he tried to move, but his body refused to respond. Memories flashed through his mind, and he wondered if this was where his story would end. Then, he saw a vision of himself as a child, clutching the cat tightly. He realized he could not die. Not yet. There was still a promise he had to fulfill. In an endless void, a mysterious voice echoed, demanding to know why he was doing nothing. Confused, the protagonist asked who was speaking. Massive words then appeared before him, commanding him to accept it. Thoughts flooded his mind, urging him to save Nero and reclaim his true color. The voice demanded that he take back what belonged to him. From a swirling mass of black liquid, a hand reached out, but our protagonist stood perfectly still. As tendrils of darkness began to coil around him, he looked down at his hands, now completely engulfed in shadow. He realized he was no longer submerged in the dark ink. His memories felt fractured and broken, but he pushed them aside. What truly mattered now was crystal clear. His form transformed into a silhouette of pure darkness, with white eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. He questioned what monstrous thing he had become. A soft cry suddenly broke through the silence. Looking up, he saw two blurred figures standing above him. They were holding a small cage, and inside it, Nero cried out. The sound snapped him back to himself. Whatever he had become, one truth remained utterly unchanged. He absolutely had to save Nero. He extended a shadow-covered hand toward the terrified men. Then, suddenly, a colossal eruption of black energy surged violently upward. From the depths, the green-haired man and his assistant recoiled in sheer terror, screaming as they stumbled backward. Peering into the gaping pit, they were horrified to find the massive ink waste completely gone. At the bottom stood a single, towering dark figure, radiating an overwhelming and truly ominous presence as it slowly advanced toward them. The green-haired man trembled uncontrollably, his face completely drained of color, as a massive, jagged claw of shadow descended from above. He stammered in utter disbelief, wondering if the terrifying being before him was truly one of the dreaded creatures. The explosion left the entire Shadow District in complete ruin. Buildings were shattered, streets torn apart, and dark, grimy residue coated everything in sight. An elderly man screamed out, hysterically at a bewildered police officer, insisting furiously that he had seen a small hand appear out of absolutely nowhere, followed by an insane eruption of black energy that utterly devastated the entire area. In an instant, as the dust slowly began to settle, medics immediately rushed in and carried away two unconscious, still bodies, the green-haired attacker and his assistant. A newly arrived pair observed the chaotic scene quietly. A red-haired man and a blue-haired woman looked down at the injured figures below and observed that both were B-rank pioneers, whose color had been utterly stripped away. The blue-haired woman's brow furrowed, struggling to fathom what immense power could possibly strip someone of their color entirely. Meanwhile, her companion urged her to remain focused on their mission. The red-haired man then clarified that they had been dispatched, following reports of a powerful creature manifesting right inside the city. The nearby police officer stiffened in shock upon realizing he was speaking to high-ranking colorists. Nervously, he ventured to ask why elites of their caliber were operating in the Shadow District. The blue-haired woman answered calmly that they were merely conducting an investigation. When the red-haired man requested to see the impact site, the officer immediately led them forward. Standing at the edge of the massive crater, the red-haired man meticulously examined the debris, noticing unsettling dark stains deeply embedded in the ground. His partner then affirmed faint, unsettling traces of a creature's presence. She pointed out how utterly abnormal it was for such an entity to appear within city limits, especially so close to the city's outskirts, as only minor creatures ever managed to slip past the walls. Peering intently into the pit's depths, the red-haired man speculated this might be an entirely new variant. Though his expression seemed bored, his eyes were razor-sharp, focused on something that defied established patterns. Tracking it would not be easy. Far away, beyond the city, scattered rubble marred a desolate, barren landscape. In the suffocating darkness, a faint cry echoed. Lin let out a soft groan, his whole body aching as he lay, hidden among the shadows. A rough, warm sensation brushed against his face. Slowly opening his eyes, he saw Nero, licking his hair. a wave of profound relief washed over him. Without a second thought, Lin pulled the black cat into a desperate, tight embrace, clutching him as if terrified he might vanish. It was only then that the searing pain fully registered. A sharp wince tightened his lips. He pushed himself upright with immense effort. Lin's mind raced, trying to piece together what happened. He remembered the men who had attacked him. He remembered being hurled into the vat of black sludge. He remembered sinking deeper into the darkness. His breath hitched as the realization hit him. He was alive. Raising his hands, he stared at them in utter disbelief. He struggled to comprehend how survival was even possible. When he touched his head, his fingers froze. His hair, once a pristine white, was now an inky, pitch black. Lin gripped his hair tightly, his mind reeling, as confusion and disbelief completely overwhelmed him. Surrounded by absolute darkness, Lin slowly rose to his feet. He couldn't see anything at all. Panic began to creep into his chest. He called out for Nero, his voice tense. In response, the cat leapt into the air and spun, releasing a brilliant, white glow that illuminated their surroundings. The light revealed a horrifying sight. They were deep within a vast cavern, encircled by countless shadowy creatures, lurking just beyond the light's edge. Lin stared in shock, his thoughts scrambling, as he tried to understand where they were. Then it hit him. They were in the Black Lands, more specifically, the Black Forest, a place so incredibly dangerous that only B-rank pioneers were allowed to enter. As the monsters began to close in, Lin's heart pounded in his chest. He shouted for Nero to stay close and bolted forward. The glowing cat flew beside him, lighting the way as they ran. A massive shadow serpent nearly crushed him, and Lin barely avoided it, shouting, an alarm at how deadly the situation had become. Even so, he spared a breath to thank Nero for guiding him. Through the darkness, they climbed jagged cliffs, leapt across broken terrain, and finally dropped down a sheer vertical slope, putting distance between themselves and the pursuing horde. As Lin ran, something strange dawned on him. The fear etched on his face slowly gave way to confusion. Dark energy pulsed faintly from his chest, and his body felt incredible. Despite the relentless sprint, he wasn't tired at all. He leaped across a massive gap with ease, landing smoothly on the other side. His eyes widened as he realized his speed, strength, and agility had far surpassed anything he'd known before. Nero suddenly stiffened, his ears twitching. A split second later, a wolf-like shadow creature lunged from the darkness. Lin reacted too slowly. His stance was wrong. He knew instantly he couldn't block it. Certain death loomed, and he shut his eyes, bracing himself. The impact came, but not as expected. A sharp cracking sound echoed through the forest. Lin felt pressure on his arm, but no pain. Opening his eyes, he saw the creature recoil in terror. Its teeth had shattered upon biting him. The shadow wolf whimpered, backing away before fleeing into the darkness. Lin stared at his uninjured arm, stunned, his breath trembling, as he realized something had fundamentally changed within him. Kay examined his arm carefully and froze. There was no wound, not even a mark. His breathing slowed as disbelief took hold. An attack that should have torn him apart had done nothing. Staring at his hands, he finally understood. This toughness, this overwhelming resilience, this was color, the very power he had been chasing his entire life. Before he could think further, the ground began to shake violently. Nero stiffened, ears snapping upright, and Kay followed the cat's gaze, just as an enormous shadow rose from the darkness. A gigantic figure hauled itself over the ridge, its single glowing eye burning with hostility. Kay's blood ran cold as he recognized the creature. A cyclops. His mind raced, wondering why a monster that normally lived deep within the Black Forest. He'd ventured so far out. The cyclops raised its colossal arm and slammed it into the ground. The impact burst outwards, sending rocks and debris flying wildly. Nero cried out, but Kay remained seated amidst the destruction. The blow had been devastating, far heavier than anything he'd ever endured before, but he was alive. More than that, a confident smile slowly spread across his face. For the first time, he realized he could actually win. Fragments of his past surged through him. His mind revisited standing alone as a child, being rejected again and again, always told he didn't belong. He clenched his fist, acknowledging he had finally grasped the strength he'd only dreamed of. Things would not stay the same anymore. Power surged through his arm as he tightened his grip. He straightened his back and planted his feet firmly into the ground, deciding he would not run again. Shadows gathered around him, drawn to the strange force awakening inside. In an instant, darkness swallowed his form, reshaping him into a being made entirely of shadow. His white eyes glowed intensely within the black silhouette. The Cyclops roared and lunged forward, reaching out to crush the small figure before it. Kay exploded off the ground, launching himself upward with terrifying force. He twisted midair and drove his fist forward. The punch landed hard. The Cyclops shattered. Its massive body disintegrated into fragments as a violent shockwave tore through the forest, flattening trees, and clearing the land in every direction. Kay flew through the air, surrounded by debris, still wrapped in shadow. Then, something shifted. The darkness peeled away from him without warning. His eyes widened as the world around him transformed. Bright sunlight poured down over a vibrant forest, waterfalls glistening below. Colors burst into view so vividly that it took his breath away. Just as suddenly, the power vanished. His hair instantly turned stark white again. Fear instantly struck him as gravity reclaimed its hold. Kay screamed, plummeting downwards, crashing violently into the forest. Down below, he dragged himself free from the wreckage. Nero hovered anxiously above him. Kay dropped to his knees, gasping for breath. As the remaining traces of shadow bled from his body, like smoke, horror crept in as he felt it clearly. Now, his very color was draining away. Panic seized his chest. He finally understood the cost. The stronger the power he used, the faster it disappeared. If he kept going like this, he would be left utterly helpless. The world suddenly went dark. A voice echoed deep within his mind, cold and commanding, asking why he hesitated. It told him his prey was already before him, and demanded that he consume it. Kay looked down at the scattered remains of the Cyclops. The voice pressed on, asking if he wanted to live, urging him to reach out his hand. Sweat rolled down his face, as exhaustion threatened to pull him into unconsciousness. The voice continued, relentless. His vision blurred. His eyes faintly glowed as survival instinct took over. Trembling, Kay obeyed. He extended his hand, and pressed it against the monster's remains. The moment he made contact, something activated. Dark energy surged outward. As the shadow lingering within the Cyclops was forcibly drawn into him, Nero stared in stunned silence, as a towering pillar of black light erupted from the forest, shooting straight into the sky. When the light finally faded, Kay collapsed against a rock. Breathing heavily, the crushing exhaustion lifted, replaced by surging strength. His hair had turned black once again, his energy restored. He tilted his head back and stared at the sky, releasing a long breath of relief. He was alive, and for the very first time, he truly believed he was going to survive. Meanwhile, back at Mari's workshop, the atmosphere was unusually calm and ordinary. Mari was hunched over her workbench, intently studying a complex blueprint, when the bell above the door chimed softly. She looked up and froze. A tall figure, wrapped in a tattered, heavy cloak, stood silently in the doorway. Their face was completely hidden beneath a deep hood. Forcing a polite smile, Mari greeted the stranger, though her hands trembled ever so slightly. She asked if they needed anything, but the figure offered no response, only radiating an intensely unsettling presence. The cloaked stranger then took a step forward. Mari's unease rapidly escalated into fear, and she pointed directly at them, blurting out that they looked extremely suspicious. When they continued to approach, panic completely took over. She snatched up a heavy wrench from the table and loudly warned them to stop, threatening to swing if they came any closer. Suddenly, the figure lunged forward. Mari screamed, squeezing her eyes shut, bracing for the absolute worst. But instead of an attack, the figure stopped short. A familiar voice calmly told her to relax. The deep hood was then pulled back, revealing a face she knew all too well. Kay scratched the back of his head awkwardly, telling her, "It's really me." He admitted even he barely recognized himself now. Mari slowly lowered the wrench, staring at him in utter disbelief. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell open, and then she exploded into a loud scream, demanding to know what on earth had happened to him. Still trembling, Mari clutched a metal pipe, her shock rapidly morphing into pure fury. She snatched up another tool, shouting that whoever did this to him would pay dearly. Swinging the tools wildly, she yelled, "I'll smash their heads in." Kay hurriedly stepped in, waving his hands and insisting he was perfectly fine, trying desperately to calm her down. But once it finally sunk in, that Kay is times standing right in front of her, Mari sets her wrench aside. She exhales shakily, admitting she totally panicked. She lost contact with him and feared the absolute worst. Her anger melts into pure relief, and she smiles softly, telling him she's just so glad he's alive. Kay quietly apologizes for worrying her. Inside, Kay can barely grasp his own situation. Falling into toxic ink, surviving, and awakening as a color, it all sounds utterly absurd, even to him. He voices one major concern, pointing out that his color is times black, asterisk. A color often associated with monsters, no less. He wonders if others will now look at him differently. After a moment, he shakes his head, deciding it simply doesn't matter. What truly matters is that he finally has a chance. He declares dramatically, "I will fight to the very end. I 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 will fight to He's heading straight to the Pioneering Corps' entrance exam, and he sincerely thanks Mari for everything she's done. He then awkwardly asks if he can borrow some clothes, promising he'll return them later. Mari sighs dramatically, asking, "How many times do you plan to beg?" Still, she smiles and waves it off, calling it an investment in a future colorist. Without warning, she grabs his hand and times him along, announcing cheerfully, "I have just the thing for you." Kay stumbles after her, completely caught off guard. The scene transitions to a massive, Colosseum-like structure, where a crowd of hopeful pioneers steadily marches up wide stone steps. Inside, hundreds of candidates gather on a vast floor, divided into large white square platforms, all waiting for the entrance exam to begin. Among them, 3 young men stand close together, whispering nervously. One of them, a blue-haired man wearing No. 183 on his chest, tries to reassure his anxious companion. The pink-haired friend can hardly believe they've made it this far, about to challenge the entrance test of the legendary S-rank Dawn Pioneering Corps. This corps is famous for its feats in the Black Lands and is seen as the city's greatest hope. Still, the candidates can't ignore how many powerful competitors are present. Their eyes catch a woman with flowing turquoise hair. She's rumored to be the daughter of a prestigious color family. She stands next to a man sporting a beanie. They also spot other promising individuals. Among them, a pink-haired boy with goggles, and a man in a gas mask. But despite all this talent, they agree one person stands head and shoulders above the rest. Their gaze lands on a young man with wild, green hair and sharp, predatory eyes. This is Gale, famously known as the Gale Sword. Many believe his success is practically guaranteed. As rumors claim, he can defeat dangerous creatures all on his own. However, he's equally infamous for his volatile temperament, which supposedly led to his expulsion from his previous corps. Laughing arrogantly, the blue-haired man, No. 183, claims he isn't afraid of someone like Gale. A shadow suddenly looms behind him. Gale stands there, his expression cold, daring him to repeat himself. The blue-haired man stiffens, fear draining the color from his face. Gale looks down on them with open disdain, calling them pathetic children. With a bored sigh, Gale turns and walks away, muttering that the quality of competitors is laughably low. For an S-rank exam, as his gaze sweeps over the crowd, he mentally dismisses nearly everyone. Until he pauses. His eyes narrow. As they settle on the turquoise-haired girl, he recognizes her immediately. Ellie Cayenne, the second daughter of the Cyan family. A smirk curls across his lips, as he admits she's at least worth noticing. Imagining the upcoming test, Gale wonders with anticipation how the rest of them will react once it truly begins. A metallic speaker crackles sharply, cutting through the arena's noise, and demanding everyone's attention. Gale and Ellie both turn toward the stage, as the announcement rings out, declaring that the entrance examination for the Dawn Pioneering Corps has officially begun. Standing atop the podium is a man with striking blonde hair and piercing yellow eyes. He calmly declared the test would commence immediately. A wave of gasps swept through the candidates, as they instantly recognized him. He was a renowned colorist from the Dawn Corps, a hero who'd played a major role in a recent, large-scale creature extermination. Excited whispers spread through the crowd. If someone of his stature had personally come to oversee the exam, it meant the Corps was taking this recruitment extremely seriously. The sheer pressure radiating from him alone made it clear that S-rank pioneers existed on an entirely different level. The examiner scanned the crowd and welcomed them briefly. He acknowledged that everyone present had their own reasons for applying: wealth, influence, glory, or a sense of duty. But he stated flatly that none of that truly mattered. His gaze sharpened as he explained that, in the end, only strength decided a person's worth. The Dawn Corps sought individuals powerful enough to step into the Black Lands and reclaim territory for humanity. Mediocrity, he said coldly, had no place here. With a sweep of his arm, he pointed toward the large, square platform spread across the arena floor. The first test, he announced, would be a tournament. Combat ability is the foundation of a pioneer's survival, because the world beyond the city walls is merciless. Only those who can fight will live. He ordered the candidates to demonstrate their power and instructed them to step forward. When their numbers were called, advancement would be decided solely by victory. The speaker rang out again, calling the first pair, No. 126, and No. 286. Gale, bearing the No. 126, stepped onto the stage with a grim expression. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Many recognized him instantly, and pitied whoever had drawn him as an opponent so early. Gale, on the other hand, grinned sharply, He welcomed the opportunity, he thought. How lucky to have some entertainment right away, especially after being bored for so long. His eyes gleamed with a predatory glint as he wondered just how thoroughly he should crush his opponent. That's when his attention shifted to the other contestant. A cloaked figure, bearing the number 286, was silently approaching. Gale frowned, finding the sight oddly unsettling. From his perspective, the man's posture seemed awkward, even clumsy and unimpressive, almost as if he didn't belong. Deciding words were utterly unnecessary, Gale wrapped his hand around his sword hilt. With a sharp, metallic ring, he drew the blade and unleashed his power, without any restraint. Green currents of wind burst outward as he swung, filling the air with a palpable, cutting pressure. Spectators watched in awe, as multiple glowing blades of wind manifested around him. Whispers erupted, praising his incredible mastery. Even at his young age, he was already wielding such advanced techniques, truly deserving of the title Gale Sword. Gale locked his fierce gaze onto the cloaked opponent, silently daring him to even attempt a defense. Stomping the ground, he gathered explosive momentum and surged forward, enveloped in a raging vortex of wind. The sheer force of his charge alone seemed capable of tearing flesh apart. The hooded figure, however, did not move. As Gale leapt into the air and brought his blade crashing down, with a roar, the cloaked man calmly stepped in, and threw a single, swift, left punch. The sound of impact echoed thunderously through the arena. Gale's body was hurled backward like a broken doll. Screams erupted from the stands as he smashed into the far wall, cracks spreading outward in a web-like pattern. His body slumped forward, completely unconscious. The match had ended in one single strike. A stunned silence fell. The hooded fighter lowered his arm and subtly flexed his wrist, slightly muttering that the sudden burst of movement had startled even him. His hood slipped back, revealing a shock of messy black hair. Meet K. Before anyone could even process what just happened, a spectator suddenly shrieked, pointing straight at K. Not at the defeated Gale, but at the strange energy swirling around him. It was black. The blonde examiner's eyes narrowed, his expression turning grim. That shade was identical to the energy, wielded by terrifying creatures. Even Ellie KN stood frozen, utterly shocked, unable to believe what she was seeing. A human wielding black energy? Was that even possible? K stood alone at the arena's center, completely oblivious to the storm he'd just unleashed. Murmurs spread rapidly as people whispered that, perhaps, the reason Gale's sword fell in one blow was this strange, ominous power. K looked around nervously at the staring crowd, confused by their reactions, and quietly wondered if he'd done something wrong. The tournament pressed on, with one fierce clash after another. In one battle, a shaking candidate desperately hurled razor-sharp stones through the air, but K surged forward without hesitation. He slipped between the attacks with ease, closed the gap in an instant, and drove his fist straight into the opponent's chest. The mage was sent flying across the arena, knocked unconscious before he even hit the ground. The announcer quickly declared K the victor. The pattern repeated itself. Another challenger was smashed into the floor, with overwhelming force, while a third barely had time to react, before being knocked out cold. K's victories were swift, brutal, and absolute. High above the arena, the blonde examiner watched closely, his interest growing by the second. He openly declared that K was by far the most outstanding applicant. With clear excitement, he remarked that this was the first recorded black holder. He insisted the Corps had to secure him immediately, before words spread beyond control. At that moment, slow, heavy footsteps echoed nearby. A relaxed voice commented that the day seemed unusually bustling, but the blonde examiner whirled around sharply, only to freeze at the sight of who had arrived. It was the red-haired man and blue-haired woman, both from the recent explosion investigation. Surprised, he questioned Team Leader Red's presence. The red-haired man casually waved him off, claiming they were merely passing through. They briefly discussed the ongoing investigation into the strange creature incident. The red-haired leader let out a sigh, admitting there had been no real progress. He then abruptly shifted the topic, asking if there were any promising candidates. The examiner promptly mentioned the young woman from the prestigious Cayenne family, and then added there was one exceptionally unusual participant. Suddenly, the red-haired leader's expression changed. His eyes locked onto the arena, as he sensed something familiar. He immediately spotted K, his gaze narrowing at the black energy surrounding the boy. As the examiner continued praising K, the red-haired man remained silent, studying him carefully. The blue-haired woman leaned closer and whispered, asking if the boy could be related to their investigation. The leader confirmed it was very likely. A new color, emerging right after the Shadow District incident, was far too suspicious to ignore. He decided to observe K closely for now. Completely unaware of the attention, K stared at his clenched fist, dark energy curling around it like smoke. Excitement surged within him, as he realized that becoming a pioneer was finally within reach. Still, he remembered the severe strain his transformation caused, and warned himself not to push too far. If his power vanished mid-battle, he would be utterly helpless. Suddenly, an overwhelming wave of freezing air swept across the arena. A towering wall of ice formed instantly. Standing calmly within the mist was Ellie Cayenne. The announcer declared contestant number 17 the victor. It turned out her opponent was completely frozen, encased solid in a block of ice. The spectators immediately erupted into a buzzing frenzy, marveling at the sheer overwhelming strength of the Cayenne family's Colorless. Kay watched, absolutely awestruck, wondering how anyone could possibly stand against magic as powerful as that. As Ellie descended the stairs, she walked past Kay, then suddenly stopped. Her sharp blue eyes locked onto him with laser focus, scrutinizing him with an undeniable air of suspicion. Without uttering a single word, she turned and continued on, leaving Kay feeling both unsettled and utterly bewildered. The announcer then declared that the first examination had officially concluded. The blonde examiner stepped forward, thanking everyone for their considerable efforts. Due to unforeseen time constraints, he explained, they would proceed directly to the very next test. The eliminated candidates were ordered to vacate the premises, many doing so with visibly defeated expressions. Just as the examiner began to detail the second test, a hand landed firmly on his shoulder. The red-haired man stepped boldly forward, flashing a confident smile as he took control. He announced that the upcoming examination would be personally conducted by none other than himself. The remaining candidates stared in utter shock, immediately recognizing Colorless, one of the Shining City's most formidable warriors. A palpable fear spread like wildfire through the crowd. His reputation was absolutely infamous. Rumors claimed his power was so incredibly destructive that even his allies kept a respectful distance, and that whenever he led an exam, no one ever survived it. The blonde examiner hesitated, warning him that altering the test format would infuriate the captain. Red simply laughed it off, casually stating he was quite used to being scolded. He then declared the test simple. Just endure. Suddenly, flames erupted from his body. In an instant, a massive wave of fire rolled forward, forming individual spheres around each and every candidate, trapping them inside blazing prisons of fire. Panic erupted as the intense heat surged. Red calmly explained that he had meticulously recreated the environment of a specific region in the Black Lands, and casually added that it would get rather warm. He then dismissed the raging flames as nothing more than a true inferno. A brutal reminder, the true Black Lands were infinitely worse. Endure, and they'd pass, and fail, and they'd never earn the right to be pioneers. Within the fiery barriers, blood-curdling screams echoed. Some candidates hammered desperately at the scorching walls, a terrifying realization. Escape was futile. Others simply trembled, consumed by terror, imagining what true hell awaited beyond the city walls, if this agonizing trial was merely considered mild. Observing from the sidelines, the blonde examiner watched with a hint of awe. Red's control was as flawlessly precise as ever, effortlessly containing so many individuals at once. Suddenly, a sharp, fracturing sound ripped through the air. Red and his assistant instinctively whirled around, just in time to witness one fire sphere flash blue, then shatter into countless pieces. Ice exploded outwards as Ellie Cayenne emerged. Free, she stood tall, framed by the glistening frozen shards. Red acknowledged her feat with a calm nod, a silent admission of its impressiveness. While ice was a natural counter to fire, his power usually rendered such advantages meaningless. After a brief moment of consideration, he conceded she truly deserved the title of prodigy. His attention then shifted to the other candidate who piqued his interest. Inside another scorching fire sphere, Kay remained perfectly, unsettlingly still. Red observed him briefly, utterly unimpressed, assuming the boy's end was imminent. Inside the barrier, however, Kay was spiraling into full-blown panic. He realized he'd spent far too much of his power earlier. His black energy was now leaking at an alarming rate, draining even faster under the intense, searing heat. Then, a horrifying thought struck him like a physical blow. If his color vanished here, he would be exposed as a colorless anomaly, destined to become a living experiment. Desperation, cold and sharp, set in. His gaze locked onto the inferno raging around him. A dangerously reckless idea began to form. Since the barrier itself was in construct of color, he wondered if it could be absorbed. He didn't know the true limits of his ability, but he had no other choice. Taking a deep breath, he pressed his hand against the scorching wall of flames. Instantly, the fire warped with violent intensity. A jolt of shock coursed through K as he realized it was actually working. A massive vortex of dark energy erupted violently from his body, tearing the crimson flames to shreds, and ruthlessly dragging them straight into his hand. Nearby, candidates shrieked in utter disbelief from the podium. Both Red and the blonde examiner stared down in complete, stunned silence. Red, however, broke into a tense, unsettling smile, with beads of sweat forming on his brow, and muttered that they had just unearthed a truly dangerous lunatic. K stood at the arena's very center. As the lingering energy slowly faded away, red and black power still swirled menacingly around his hands, twisting together in a truly frightening display. The entire crowd had fallen completely silent, yet inside, K was anything but calm. His heart raced wildly as panic clawed at his chest. He forced an incredibly awkward smile, thinking bitterly to himself that this was absolutely not how things were supposed to go. Instead of blending in discreetly, he had drawn far too much attention to himself. Eli Cayenne remained utterly motionless, staring at him as if her entire world had frozen. For a moment, she wondered if her own eyes were deceiving her. Black. Was that truly a color a human could wield? The very idea unsettled her deeply. A cold anxiety crept into her chest as she observed the young man before her, wrapped in an unsettling, unfamiliar darkness. Years of relentless pressure and expectation surged through her mind, and unwillingly, she was forced to acknowledge the truth. He was incredibly strong. Strong enough that even if she fought at her full power, victory would not be guaranteed. As Kay walked away, Ellie felt an undeniable chill. There was something about him that went far beyond raw strength. Shaking her head, she tried to forcefully push those unsettling thoughts aside. Colorist Red casually slung an arm over Kay's shoulder, as if they were long-lost acquaintances. With a relaxed, almost sly grin, he told him that things wouldn't be quite so easy next time. He remarked that the way Kay's black power swallowed everything was absolutely fascinating, and he couldn't suppress his curiosity, suggesting they talk somewhere much more private. Red then guided Kay away, insisting it was for Kay's own protection, though his eyes screamed a different story. Sweating profusely, Kay nervously asked about the exam. Red just laughed, telling him he'd obviously passed. Hearing that, Kay completely froze. The realization hit him like a truck. His reckless display had actually landed him his dream. Emotion welled up deep inside him, as he finally accepted his new role as a pioneer. From right behind them, the blonde examiner shouted furiously at Red for interfering without permission. Red just waved it off, laughing and begging for forgiveness. Just this once. With a tired sigh, the examiner then addressed the waiting crowd, announcing that the exam would indeed continue, despite the disruption. He confirmed that number 17, Ellie, had passed outright for breaking the barrier, while the remaining candidates would face another test. Ellie barely registered the announcement. Her eyes were fixed, however, on the dark passage, where Kay was being led away. The scene then shifted to a desolate industrial zone. Red stood beside a vehicle, with Kay close by, while the blue-haired investigator waited silently in the driver's seat. Red told her to stay put. Kay glanced around, and his blood instantly ran cold. Before him stretched a field of shattered ground and ruined structures. He recognized it instantly. This was the very place where he had been thrown, into the dreaded ink waste. Red surveyed the wreckage with a grim expression, commenting simply that it was an eyesore. He explained that a serious incident had occurred here. Kay stiffened as Red continued, stating that for the first time ever, 2 pioneers had been discovered, completely drained of their color. Witnesses had even reported the appearance of a massive creature. Turning sharply, Red fixed his gaze on Kay. He pointed out the timing was far too convenient. A mysterious creature appeared, and shortly after, the first human with black color emerged. Red called it a coincidence, but his glowing eyes screamed he didn't believe it. He described Kay's power as something that devoured other colors entirely. This ability, Red stated calmly, doesn't belong to this system at all. Kay's thoughts spiraled. He realized Red had suspected him from the very beginning. For a fleeting moment, he considered running, but the crushing aura in front of him instantly erased that idea. Escaping a hero was utterly impossible. Then, unexpectedly, Red burst out laughing. The tension shattered. He waved dismissively, saying he was only probing Kay's reaction. Though, he complained, Kay's honesty ruined all the fun. Kay stared at him, confused and unsure. Red explained that, while the investigation was his official duty, what truly interested him was Kay himself. Normally, color abilities were absolute. They never mixed, never merged. Yet, Kay's power ignored those rules entirely. Red pointed out that during the second exam, Kay clearly lacked proper control. Kay tried to explain, but Red cut him off. Crimson light flared around Red's body. As he announced they would conduct a test, K blinked in confusion. Red extended his hand and said he needed first-hand confirmation. Smiling confidently, he challenged K to absorb his power. Panic surged through K as he tried to refuse, warning that it was dangerous. Red only laughed, telling him it was far too early to worry about someone at his level. His tone hardened as he ordered K to stop talking and act. Black was known as the Black Lance, a force that consumed everything without exception. Red understood how dangerous such a power could be. Allowing it to exist unchecked could destabilize the entire Shining City. A darker thought crossed his mind. Few people knew this truth yet, but humanoid creatures existed. If K ever became one, or faced one, Red knew he might be forced to act. Feeling the overwhelming pressure radiating from the colorist, K let out a slow breath. Even so, he nodded, accepting the test. He reached out and grabbed Red's wrist, nervously asking him to promise that he wouldn't be blamed, no matter what went wrong. Even as he spoke, black energy surged from his body once more. The moment their hands connected, the air twisted violently, a powerful shockwave ripped outward. K gasped, as scorching red energy blasted straight into his arm, smashing against the black aura around him. His heart plummeted with immediate regret. Flames exploded from their point of contact, engulfing him completely, and an agonized scream tore from his throat, as unbearable heat seared through his body. He pleaded with Red to stop, admitting in a panic that he couldn't control it. It felt like molten lava flooding his veins. Through the raging inferno, Red manifested like a towering deity, forged entirely from fire, further solidifying why he ranked among the city's greatest heroes. Red remained unnervingly calm within the flames, his gaze fixed with sharp focus. He swiftly realized that K's black energy was relentlessly devouring his power, acting like an entity starved beyond restraint. However, since the ability was still immature, Red could still resist it, but he knew beyond a doubt that an ordinary colorist would have perished instantly. As the firestorm raged, Red's curiosity deepened. What K had revealed during the exam was clearly not the true extent of his power. What truly captivated him wasn't just the absorption, but what happened once the color was taken. The energy spiraled wildly out of control. Red watched intently as the black aura around Kai's arm began to warp, growing jagged as it merged with the red energy. Then, a violent eruption of crimson and darkness burst outward, forcing Red several steps back. Smoke billowed through the ruins, and from its depths emerged a horrifying sight. K had partially transformed. The right side of his body was now encased in grotesque armor, a grotesque fusion of condensed red and black energy, shaped like a monstrous, clawed, demonic form. Red clenched his teeth. The silhouette was unmistakable. Glaring at the glowing eye and monstrous limb, he silently conceded that this form could easily be mistaken for a monster. In that instant, his suspicion solidified into certainty. K was at the heart of the incident. Where the pioneers had lost their color, K reeled on his feet, barely conscious. Red shifted his stance, deciding this situation couldn't go on any longer. He conjured a blazing sphere of fire, preparing to forcefully suppress K before things escalated any further. But then, K let out a low, feral growl. Red froze, sensing resistance not against him, but against something far deeper within K's mind. He stood in an endless void, submerged in darkness. Enormous red letters seared across his vision, screaming demands for more color, more energy. The voices howled hungrily, urging him to stop resisting and take everything available in the real world. K gasped and trembled as the whispers clawed at his thoughts. They mocked his restraint, calling it wasteful, insisting he consume it all. K screamed back in his mind, ordering them to shut up with sheer willpower. His remaining eye glowed crimson. As he crushed the voices down, he forced the chaotic energy inward, compressing it violently. A shockwave burst outward, as the power reluctantly obeyed. The jagged armor shattered and dissolved into nothing. Silence followed. K dropped to one knee, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. Red stared at him with genuine astonishment. Suppressing that level of power alone was something even veteran colorists would struggle to accomplish. K's heart hammered wildly. As he tried to understand what had just happened, he couldn't believe he'd survived, or that he'd nearly lost himself. Fear crept in as he realized he had gone berserk, in front of someone like Red. Stealing himself, he took an unsteady step forward, knowing he needed answers. Red, however, he looked absolutely thrilled, and let out a hearty laugh. Red admitted that the power K had absorbed was far stronger than anyone anticipated. Still, he declared the experiment a success, flashing a grin. Because it had been fun, he reminded K that anyone aiming for true greatness would have to accept danger along the way. Red then waved his hand, announcing the test was over. But after a pause, his tone subtly shifted. He reminded Kay that he was, in fact, the investigator, assigned to the catastrophic destruction of this very district. With a calm, yet chilling smile, he pointed out that Kay fit the culprit's profile perfectly. Kay's blood ran ice cold. Red elaborated further. Witnesses had reported seeing a massive shadow creature, and interest in the case ran far deeper than Kay realized. Once word spread about a human wielding such dark power, suspicion would naturally fall squarely on him. Red gestured toward the ruined landscape, nodding gravely. The damage alone would cost hundreds of millions to repair. If the city deemed Kay too dangerous, exile or worse would be absolutely inevitable. Kay clenched his fists, a fire of frustration burning in his chest. He knew the truth wouldn't matter if he couldn't prove it. Then, Red offered a tantalizing way out. If Kay agreed to operate directly under his command, Red said he might be able to intervene. Kay didn't hesitate, not for even a single heartbeat. He bowed deeply, practically folding himself in half, loudly declaring that he placed himself entirely under Red's authority. Red raised a hand, telling him to listen closely. First, he clarified that this protection wouldn't come free. In exchange, Kay would owe him favors in the future. He calmly asked if Kay believed he could handle that. Kay forced a trembling smile. Inside, he screamed that anything was better than prison, debt, or becoming a mere test subject. Without an ounce of hesitation, he agreed, promising to do whatever Red required. In the bleak wasteland, a tiny creature trembled, as a massive wheel crashed down beside it, missing it by mere inches. Meanwhile, a heavily armored transport thundered past. The vehicle pushed through the thick, fog-filled terrain of the Black Lands, its engine roaring against the dead silence. Aboard the transport, Kay gazed out the reinforced window, realizing this was the farthest he'd ever ventured. For the first time, it truly felt like he had stepped onto the Trailblazer's path. His thoughts were abruptly cut short by a hostile glare. Gale, his green hair bristling with irritation, shot Kay a sharp look and sneered, calling him black-haired one. He snapped that Kay was annoying and told him to shut up, even though Kay hadn't uttered a single word. Kay blinked in confusion, unsure how he'd provoked him. The transport bay felt suffocating. Kay shifted awkwardly, thinking that starting his pioneer career immediately should have felt exciting. Yet, the tension in the air was unmistakable. He glanced at Gale, seething with rage, and then at Ellie Cyan, who sat silently with a chilling expression. A quiet doubt crept into his mind. Was joining this team really a good idea? His thoughts drifted back to the day before. Red had asked him if he was prepared to join the exploration mission, explaining that he needed Kay to head toward a specific location, in an unexplored zone. When Kay hesitated, Red laughed easily and told him not to overthink it. He showed Kay a map, and reassured him he wouldn't be alone. Other recruits, who passed the exam, would be deployed nearby, and the official route would be announced soon. Kay's only task was to arrive on time. Returning to the present, Kay noticed that everyone was already seated in the transport. Because Red's involvement had disrupted the original exam, the candidates were given another opportunity. After additional rigorous testing, many skilled participants, including Gale, had passed. Ellie Cyan, the highest-ranked rookie, had joined Red Squad by her own request. Gale's eyes burned as he stared at Kay. The memory of his humiliation still gnawed at him. He convinced himself that his defeat was nothing more than a momentary lapse, swearing it would never happen again. He then muttered a chilling threat under his breath, warning Kay to be prepared once this exploration wrapped up, adding, with a bitter tone, that if Raven hadn't been there, Kay would already be pushing up daisies. Ellie Cyan, however, cut in with an icy tone, telling Gale to stop making a fool of himself. She then relentlessly mocked him, claiming he'd likely be knocked out in a single hit once more. Gale furiously snapped back, demanding to know precisely what she meant. Ellie simply brushed him off without even a glance, stating flatly that Gale was utterly no match for Kay. Kay turned to Ellie, a flicker of surprise and faint relief crossing his face, thinking she might actually be someone reasonable. But that fleeting hope vanished instantly. Ellie's sharp gaze then snapped towards him, as she brought up a past agreement, in a tone that left him utterly bewildered. She then told him bluntly that the loser should simply stay quiet and follow orders. Kay stood there, utterly baffled, caught between two openly hostile teammates. Letting out a quiet sigh, he realized managing this chaotic team would be anything but easy. But the transport finally crossed the dark, desolate waters of the wasteland and approached a distant, imposing facility. It then rolled into a bustling loading dock, where workers bustled about with critical supplies. Once disembarked, Kay, Ellie, Gale, and the other recruits stepped into the forward base of the Dawn Pioneering Corps. Kay looked around in absolute awe at the sheer scale of operations. The sheer volume of resources made him truly realize just how different an S-rank core mission truly was, from his solitary ventures into the dangerous Black Lands. Without warning, someone then poked Kay gently on the cheek. He turned to find Mari beaming brightly at him. She explained cheerfully that, since this was his very first mission, she absolutely insisted on coming along to support him. Opening her jacket, she then revealed that Nero had come along too. Kay gently took the adorable black cat, thanking Mari profusely for looking after him so well. She smiled warmly, stating Nero was truly family, adding that she'd gotten a chance to join the expedition as support staff, her skills proving invaluable there. A loud announcement then echoed across the base, summoning everyone to assemble. As the pioneers gathered in the gray wasteland, the speaker announced their imminent entry into the Black Lands. Kay handed Nero back to Mari, asking her to take good care of him. She warned him not to do anything reckless, and Kay smiled, promising he'd return safely. Mari hugged Nero tightly, but suddenly, the cat slipped free from her arms. She gasped as Nero sprinted toward Kay, melting straight into the shadow at his feet. Mari froze, her eyes wide in disbelief. She stammered Kay's name, utterly unable to comprehend what she'd just witnessed. The group soon arrived at a heavily fortified cave entrance. At the front stood a woman with bright orange hair, wearing a white coat, as she shouted orders. She announced that a new batch of recruits was about to enter the Black Lands. She stressed that safety was the absolute highest priority, warning that reconnaissance teams had detected unknown, dangerous creatures in Area 21, a highly risky zone, where the remains of an Escos, A-rank creature had recently been discovered. A male pioneer rushed up to her, nervously calling her Arancia. He reported that the red team leader had brought the new recruits, but had already broken formation without authorization. Arancia's eyes widened as she demanded confirmation. When the messenger nodded, she let out a weary sigh, muttering, "That man is causing trouble again." The group quietly slipped into a narrow canyon, deliberately breaking away from the main force. Colorist Red moved at the front, extending his hand into the darkness, as if parting the shadows themselves. The small unit K, Gale, Elishon, and Red had fully separated from the larger formation. Kay glanced back uneasily, asking if this was truly acceptable, pointing out that the main army was heading in a completely different direction. Red calmly replied their objective lay elsewhere. Kay's unease deepened as he looked at Gale and Ellie, realizing the entire squad consisted of fresh recruits. Gale suddenly exploded in anger, demanding to know why he and Ellie were dragged along. He shouted that he'd heard Red originally planned to bring only Kay, and he clearly felt insulted by being treated as an afterthought. Red merely smiled, his red aura flickering faintly, as he explained that his personal guidance wasn't something handed out lightly. Allowing only Kay to receive it would be unfair. He then added that, while he had no intention of babysitting them, he also wouldn't allow them to suffer serious harm. With that, he cut off the argument and ordered them to move out. Not long after, Kay's eyes widened as a hostile presence emerged, deep within the cavern. Shadowy creatures closed in from every direction. Red raised a lantern, illuminating the chaos. As Kay, Gale, and Ellie were plunged into battle, a massive, wolf-like beast burst out of the darkness. Ellie reacted instantly, her blue energy blade piercing straight through the creature's body. She landed smoothly, her expression tightening, as she fully grasped what fighting in the Black Lands truly meant. Surrounded by countless glowing eyes and endless pressure, she realized this was nothing like training. Tightening her grip on her sword, she resolved to control her stamina. Carefully casting a glance toward Kay, she silently vowed not to fall behind him. At the same time, Kay seized a shadow creature by the throat and crushed it effortlessly with his bare hand. Ellie froze in disbelief. She demanded to know why Kay wasn't using a dropper. Kay hesitated before admitting he didn't own one. He explained they were far too expensive, and added that he felt fine fighting without it. Ellie stared at him, as if he'd just said something utterly impossible. Gale's reaction escalated dramatically, yelling that it made absolutely no sense for a pioneer to have never touched a dropper. Droppers were essential tools for pioneers, specifically designed to infuse weapons with color energy. In order to properly combat these creatures, without coloring a target, taking down these monsters should be impossible. Yet, here stood Kay, surrounded by fallen enemies, having crushed them with nothing but his bare hands. This blatant contradiction left both Ellie and Gale utterly shaken. Gale's grip tightened around his weapon, as his hand trembled. The memory of the exam resurfaced, the sheer humiliation of realizing he couldn't even injure someone who wasn't using a dropper. His frustration twisted into pure hatred, as he glared at Kay's back, silently swearing that one day, he would personally crush him. As they pressed deeper into the cave, Red continued, leading the way with the lantern, while Gale trailed behind, simmering with rage. Red glanced back at the group, a faint smirk forming on his face. Watching two supposed geniuses being pushed forward by a rookie wasn't a bad sight at all. His smile widened as he thought to himself that things were only going to get more interesting. In a relaxed tone, he urged them onward, saying they were almost at their destination, and suggesting they wrap things up quickly, so they could celebrate afterward. After the brutal clash with the shadow beasts, the remains of Wolf, like creatures, were scattered across the canyon floor. Colorist Red called for a short 10-minute rest, but he made it clear to Gale, Kay, and Ellie Cyan that this was only a pause, and that the true objective still lay ahead. Gale let out an annoyed sigh, complaining that he had already burned through a large portion of his color. He took out a small vial, filled with glowing green liquid, and drank it without hesitation. As Kay immediately recognized it as personal ink, an extremely refined alchemical substance, used by pioneers to restore their color reserves, because each bottle had to be customized just to match the user's chosen color scheme, and the price tag was absolutely astronomical. Kay watched on in silence, as both Gale and Ellie recharged their energy, unable to hide a fleeting trace of envy. He briefly wished he could afford such a luxury, but quickly shoved the thought aside. Instead, he stepped away from the group, and approached the fallen shadow creature's corpse. Reaching out, he activated his unique ability. Black energy surged violently from the corpse, spiraling into his palm as the shadow absorbed directly into his very being. The dark power surged through his veins, and Kay clenched his fist tight, feeling his full strength restored. He then casually announced that he was back to full power. When he turned around, he found Gale and Ellie staring at him in utter disbelief. Ellie cautiously asked if he was truly fine. Kay waved off her concern, saying he'd done this before. Gale, however, nearly shouted, unable to believe Kay had just absorbed a monster so casually. Before the conversation could continue, Red cut in, stating the break was over. The group moved deeper into the canyon, until Red suddenly stopped and announced their arrival. Ahead of them stood an enormous dome of swirling, black energy, completely blocking their path. Kay stared intently at it, and muttered that it looked like a massive, black curtain. Red smiled at Kay's reaction, and explained that this barrier was the very reason he had brought him along. To prove his point, Red condensed red energy into his palm, and fired a powerful beam straight at the dome. The attack vanished the moment it touched the surface, swallowed entirely by the impenetrable darkness. Red explained that any attempt to break the barrier by force only fed it, making it stronger. He pointed out the similarity to Kay's own ability, and said he had suspected Kay would be the only one capable of removing it, gesturing toward the ominous wall. Red then revealed the path to the ruins lay just beyond this point, and their true target, the Stella fragment, was hidden deep inside. Kay's eyes widened, while Gale frowned. She asked, "What even times is times a Stella?" While Ellie admitted she'd never heard a word about it. Red calmly assured them it was indeed real, and the Shining City was times desperate times to obtain it. Then, he turned to Kay, ordering him to erase the curtain. Stepping forward, Kay placed his hand against the towering wall of darkness. Instantly, his absorption ability flared to life. The black, oppressive energy of the barrier surged violently into his outstretched arm, forming a massive, swirling vortex. As the enormous dome began collapsing inward, Red, Gale, and Ellie watched as the obstruction was steadily devoured. Red's grin widened, a chilling sight, satisfied that his gamble had absolutely paid off. As the barrier finally vanished, he remarked that Kay's power would be absolutely invaluable. Kay, however, looked anything times but times pleased. Sweat poured down his face, as his body trembled violently under the strain of containing such an overwhelming amount of raw energy. Without warning, the very ground began to quake. Gale and Ellie stiffened, as the vibrations intensified dramatically, realizing this disturbance would undoubtedly draw monsters from all directions imaginable. The echoing roar of collapsing energy ripped through the canyon, and moments later, black, wolf-like creatures poured out from the cliffs. The group was completely surrounded. Ellie and Gale immediately drew their weapons, while Red merely laughed, commenting they had quite the enthusiastic welcome. Red then ordered Gale and Ellie to deal with the onslaught of incoming enemies, while Kay focused on finishing his absorption. His tone was cold and utterly decisive, as he commanded them to eliminate every single creature. Gale moved first, his wind-infused strikes tearing through the shadows with blinding speed. Ellie followed, summoning towering ice spikes that erupted from the very ground and skewered multiple beasts at once. Red, meanwhile, observed calmly. He nodded, ready to jump in at any moment, but it wasn't necessary. With minimal effort, He conjured brilliant red energy orbs, firing precise beams that struck true. They utterly obliterated the last of the monsters. Despite being fresh recruits, their combat prowess was undeniably top tier. Meanwhile, Kay remained kneeling, enveloped by the barrier's remnants, sweat beading and dripping. He fought to stabilize the volatile energy, flooding his body. Red watched with a satisfied smirk, internally musing how convenient it was to let his subordinates handle the dirty work. Kay, however, sensed something unsettling. The barrier's power felt disturbingly similar to his own abilities. He instantly recognized the immense danger. If his concentration wavered even slightly, this energy could reverse, draining his very life force. Instead, gritting his teeth, Kay refused to yield. He silently vowed he wouldn't be overpowered. With one final, powerful push of will, the absorption finally concluded. Kay staggered to the edge of the newly cleared path, his breathing ragged, sweat pouring down his face. He confirmed aloud. The barrier's energy was completely consumed, but as he looked ahead, his heart sank. Beyond where the barrier once stood, wasn't a corridor or even a chamber, but a colossal void, a seemingly bottomless pit of absolute darkness. Peering into it sent a shiver straight down his spine. He wondered if this endless abyss truly was the entrance to the ruins. Regaining his composure, he turned back and reported to the team leader. "The curtain has been successfully removed," he stated. Red nodded in approval, openly praising Kay for completing the daunting task. He then raised his voice, informing the others that the obstruction was gone, and ordered them to finish off any remaining enemies. Without warning, Red's expression hardened. His instincts screamed, "Danger!" In a blur of motion, he lunged forward, seizing both Ellie and Gale. He yanked them backward with overwhelming force. A split second later, an unseen, a devastating slash ripped through the space they'd just vacated. This invisible attack carved deep trenches into the canyon floor, obliterating the last of the shadow beasts. Rocks and dust rained down hard. As Red landed safely on higher ground, with Ellie and Gale right behind him, Gale stared at the destruction in stunned silence, fully aware he would have died instantly if Red had reacted any slower. Red exhaled grimly, realizing the earlier lack of resistance had a reason. Something far more terrifying had been driving the monsters away. He recalled intelligence reports, warning of a powerful entity roaming nearby. As the dust settled, a lone figure emerged from the haze, walking straight toward them, dragging a massive blade along the ground. Red muttered, "There's no longer any time to waste." The stranger stepped fully into view. His hair was split in color, white on one side, black on the other. Half of his face was covered by a dark, mask-like growth that looked fused right to his flesh. Numerous weapons were strapped across his back. A suffocating pressure radiated from him. As his cold gaze locked onto the pioneers, Red immediately positioned himself between the threat and his team. He barked orders, telling Kay and the others to listen carefully. Shoving a lantern into Kay's hands, Red issued a rapid command. They were to enter the ruins at once and secure the Stella fragment. Kay's eyes widened in alarm. As he asked, did Red seriously expect them to go down there alone? Red answered without hesitation, stating their abilities were more than sufficient. Before anyone could object, Red released a violent burst of force. Kay, Ellie, and Gale were shoved toward the abyss. As Red shouted at them to stop hesitating and move, Kay cried out Red's name. As the three recruits plunged into the darkness below, left behind, Red stood at the edge of the pit, his red aura blazing fiercely. One of the recruits, faint whispers echoed from the deepest shadows. They questioned what they were meant to do, all alone. Behind Red, the armed stranger closed in fast. These two formidable figures locked gazes in a silent, tense confrontation. Red knew this approaching battle would be anything but simple. Far below, deep within the abyss, Kay lay sprawled out on the cold ground. He groaned as a jolt of pain shot through his body, clutching his head and struggling hard to rise. In the suffocating darkness, he remembered the lantern Red had given him. He activated it, wondering if this was truly the ruins. Light burst forth, and Kay froze instantly. But instead of ancient stone halls, the lantern revealed the skeletal remains of enormous, modern skyscrapers. Shattered concrete structures and collapsed roads stretched endlessly into the inky darkness. It looked like an entire city had been utterly destroyed and buried deep beneath the earth. Standing precariously on a narrow ledge, Kay lifted the lantern even higher, illuminating even more of the ruin. Words utterly failed him as he stared at the underground graveyard of a modern metropolis. Kay stared at the underground city, utterly dumbfounded. He muttered that a place like this simply shouldn't exist. Then he complained that the oppressive darkness made it impossible to see properly. Almost immediately, a familiar voice snapped at him to stop his whining. and moved toward the light. A wave of relief washed over him when he spotted Gale and Ellie close by. He admitted honestly that he had been terrified of being separated. Gale clicked his tongue, immediately blaming Kay for dragging them into this mess. But Ellie cut him off sharply, saying he'd been just as lost as anyone else. Gale uneasily scanned the endless, desolate ruins, asking, "What kind of place is this, even?" A tremor of anxiety crept into his voice, as he pointed out just how ridiculous it sounded to search for something called a stela fragment in a city that seemed to stretch on forever. Kay nodded, agreeing that, without any clue what they were even looking for, just wandering around aimlessly like this could take days, or, even worse. Deep down, Kay really wished Nero was right there with him. As if directly answering his unvoiced wish, a faint, ethereal glow suddenly appeared near his feet. Kay's eyes widened instantly when he saw the small, black cat standing there. Panic instantly seized him, as he frantically wondered how Nero had possibly managed to follow them all the way down here. Ellie's gaze fell upon the creature, and cautiously questioned if it was a living creature. Kay felt a shiver of cold sweat trickle down his back, fearing his secret was finally out in the open. But then, he took a deep breath and steadied himself. Instead of hiding, he decided this was the perfect chance to demonstrate Nero's true, undeniable worth. Calling out to the stunned others, Kay confidently scooped up the cat and boldly announced that he actually had a super reliable way to pinpoint the stela fragment. Gale immediately erupted in anger, calling it utter nonsense. But Ellie totally ignored him, her attention completely captivated by the mysterious cat. Before Kay could elaborate any further, Nero let out a soft, melodic cry, and suddenly sprang free. The instant it gracefully leapt into the air, its body dissolved into a swirling, ethereal mass of pure light. A brilliant, overwhelming glow suddenly flooded the ruins, forcing all three to instinctively shield their eyes from the glare. The light then swiftly shot forward, forming a perfectly clear path right through the darkness. They followed the luminous, winding trail, as it intricately wound between the colossal, shattered buildings. Gale just muttered in utter disbelief, questioning how any creature could show intelligence on this time's incredible level, and demanding to know exactly where Kay had found such a thing. Kay simply ignored his outburst, focusing intently instead on interpreting Nero's subtle movements. He calmly declared that the stela fragment was very close, right up ahead. In fact, the glowing shape suddenly zipped away, racing straight toward a massive, intimidating concrete structure. A gaping, dark tunnel yawned open at its base. Kay stared into its ominous depths uneasily, wondering just how deep they would have to venture. Gale mocked him with a scoff. "Scared already, Kay?" Kay shot back instantly, without a hint of hesitation, saying they were going straight in. Inside, the vast corridor stretched wide and impossibly tall. With Nero's faint glow lighting their way, Kay remarked that this facility was far vaster than he'd ever imagined. Suddenly, Nero halted before an enormous metal door, hovering there with insistent urgency. Kay instantly realized it must have found something crucial. The silence was shattered by a thunderous, metallic impact. A colossal, mechanical foot slammed down directly in front of them. All three froze as a towering, rust-covered automaton lumbered into view. Gale frowned, nodding. This thing was nothing like the biological creatures they usually fought. A focused beam of light swept out from the machine, scanning Ellie first. Symbols appeared, identifying her blue color. The scanner moved to Gale next, registering green. Finally, the light fell on Kay. His heart sank, as he realized it was analyzing their colors. The scan complete, the display changed, identifying absolute pitch black. Instantly, the automaton's eye flared brightly. In a distorted mechanical voice, it announced that it had detected the color of the Black Witch and classified Kay as a high-level threat. Elimination procedures began. Kay barely had time to react before a massive metal fist crashed toward him. The blow sent him skidding backward across the floor. Pain shot through his body, but he managed to block the worst of it. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself upright and glared at the machine. Shouting in anger and defiance, Kay declared that if this automaton wanted a fight, then he would not hold anything back. The towering automaton slowly lifted its enormous arm, metal joints groaning, as it prepared to crush everything in its path. Kay rushed forward, slamming his fist into the machine's forearm. Pain shot through his arm, instantly forcing him back. The impact barely dented the surface, and he realized with shock just how absurdly durable the armor was. Gale could only stare, utterly stunned, as the robot reeled back its arm, gearing up for another crushing blow. Ellie reacted in a flash, darting forward, thrusting her rapier right at the machine's torso. The blade struck true, but instead of piercing through, it ricocheted off with a furious shower of sparks. Ellie froze, staring at her weapon in utter disbelief. Not even a single scratch marred the metal surface. Panic flickered across her features. As a terrifying thought began to sink in, her color might be completely useless against this mechanical foe. While they struggled, Kay forced himself to stay calm and observe. His eyes locked onto a faint, pulsating glow, emanating from the robot's chest. Inside the transparent casing, liquid energy churned violently. He instantly understood. That was its core. Kay lunged again, aiming straight for that weak point, but the machine moved far faster than he anticipated. Its arms swung sideways like a massive club, forcing Kay to twist his body mid-stride, narrowly avoiding being utterly crushed. He skidded backward, breathing hard, frustration burning fiercely in his chest. Normal attacks just weren't going to work here. Then he remembered the sensation from before. The time his body had been consumed by black energy. Fully transforming again was too dangerous. The cost was simply too high. Instead, he made a crucial decision. Kay drew in a deep breath, focusing everything he had into his right arm alone. Dark energy condensed rapidly, wrapping his fist in a dense, pitch-black layer that pulsed like a living thing. The pressure was immense, but he held it together. With a sharp shout, Kay launched himself into the air. His empowered punch struck the robot, dead center in its chest. The black-coated fist pierced straight through the armor and smashed right into the glowing core. A violent shockwave erupted outward as the core shattered, sending fragments flying. The automaton's upper body exploded apart, its head tearing free and crashing to the ground. As the light in its eye flickered and died, silence fell as Kay landed heavily among the wreckage, gasping for breath. Then, a shaky sigh of relief slowly escaped him. Gale and Ellie could only gape, utterly speechless. As the swirling dust finally settled, Kay spotted a spherical object rolling right by his feet. He picked it up, realizing it was the shattered core. A faint smile touched his lips, thinking Mari would absolutely adore something like this. But his moment of relief was fleeting. Gale suddenly roared, demanding to know just what that power was. He and Ellie pressed in on Kay, bombarding him with non-stop questions. Kay stiffened, sweat beading on his brow, awkwardly trying to brush it off. He explained that the technique devoured a huge amount of his color and wasn't something he could just use freely. Before anyone could press him further, a deep, mechanical rumble echoed from behind them. The massive metal door they'd been standing near began to slowly creak open on its own. Beyond it stretched an abyss of endless darkness, so profound, it seemed to swallow light itself. Without warning, Nero shot out from the void, crying out anxiously. The cat hovered near Kay, trembling, clearly petrified with fear. Kay followed Nero's terrified gaze toward the doorway, an icy dread crawling up his spine. He admitted he couldn't discern anything inside, but stepped closer regardless. The moment his fingers grazed the surface, the impenetrable darkness rippled like liquid. Then, everything utterly exploded. Thick tendrils of shadow burst forth from the doorway, wrapping around all three of them like a vice. Gale and Ellie screamed as they were violently yanked forward, powerless against the overwhelming force. Kay reached out a hand instinctively, but it was utterly useless. The hungry darkness swallowed them whole. They fell endlessly until they finally slammed into the ground. Gale let out a loud groan, cursing the brutal fall and the suffocating blackness. He pushed himself up, rubbing at his chest. Then, he froze solid. His hands trembled as he stared down at his own body. The vibrant green that once defined his very power was gone. His jacket, his body, even his hands were now completely drained, of all color, reduced to dull, lifeless shades of black. A chilling, gray panic gripped him. As he clutched his chest in utter disbelief, Kay and Ellie stood right beside him, equally paralyzed with horror. Their vibrant world had utterly drained of color. They stood trapped in a bleak, monochrome void, cloaked in an eerie silence, gaping at their own colorless bodies, terrified and utterly bewildered, unable to grasp what had just unfolded. Far from those buried ruins, a lone scorpion scuttled across the wasteland, its tiny shadow stretching towards the distant, shining city. Within the city's towering walls was the Eastern Government Office. Inside, the chief slammed his desk in a furious rage, demanding to know if Kay had been found. A trembling subordinate, however, reported that the boy was currently on an exploration mission, under the supervision of Colorist Red. He carefully added that Kay, himself, had requested the authorities not interfere. The chief exploded in anger at the mention of black. He roared that, allowing someone with such a dangerous color into the field was sheer madness. Even if Red was a celebrated hero, this crossed an undeniable line. He ranted that recent creature sightings had already plunged the ruling council into panic, with whispers spreading that the catastrophic black wave might be starting again. If things went wrong, he knew the blame would fall squarely on him. As he raged, a woman with pink and yellow hair lounged nearby, smiling lazily. Chamalaya, leader of the Dawn Pioneering Corps, teased him for getting worked up again, and warned that his blood pressure would land him in a hospital bed someday. She simply told him to calm down. Red, she argued, was not reckless. If anyone could keep an eye on a dangerous variable, it was him, Chamalaya added. Turns out, taking a risk like this could lead to unexpected gains. Stirring her tea, she remarked that trust mattered more than fear. Right now though, she grimaced at the bitter taste. The chief ignored her, and dumped an absurd amount of sugar into the pot, muttering about how anyone could drink it otherwise. He snapped at her to focus. Chamalaya's playful expression faded, as she acknowledged the real issue. Black was feared, because of the legend of the Black Witch. That color symbolized death, despair, and the first black wave, a catastrophe that nearly wiped humanity out. She reminded him how the world had once drowned in darkness, how creatures had flooded the land, and how the Black Lands were born. Another wave, she said quietly, was inevitable someday. With recent anomalies and the emergence of a black wielder, the situation could no longer be ignored. If humanity wanted to survive, they would need every possible strength, even black. She urged the chief to convince the council. The chief exhaled heavily, admitting it would not be easy. Still, as he stared at a dossier containing Kay's photograph, he murmured that perhaps the fate of the city truly did rest on that boy's shoulders. Meanwhile, in a boundless void of darkness, three figures stood outlined in faint white light. Kay, Gale, and Ellie stared around in confusion, unable to tell where they were. Panic overtook Gale as he pointed at his own body, screaming that his color was gone. He demanded to know why Kay still seemed unaffected. Kay replied flatly that he had no idea, suggesting it might be because his color was black, identical to the space around them. Gale suddenly doubled over, drained, while Ellie clutched her head. As weakness washed through her, Kay watched in confusion. He felt completely fine. Slowly, he realized why. He had lived most of his life without color. This emptiness felt familiar to him. Gale muttered, feeling something strange stir within his body. Squinting, he noticed a faint glow pulsing within his chest, like a hidden core of power. Suddenly, a chorus of whispers flooded the void. The three froze as Gale shouted into the darkness, demanding whoever was there reveal themselves. Kay listened carefully. The voices felt wrong, different from the one that usually haunted him. From the shadows, a woman's silhouette emerged. Her long hair flowed unnaturally, and her form looked neither fully solid, nor entirely unreal. Kay sensed her presence instantly and turned. Gale and Ellie stood frozen, terror-stricken. She had appeared without warning. Slowly, the figure raised her hand and pointed directly at Kay. His vision shattered. Kay was dragged into a violent storm of images. He saw a city, being swallowed by a spiraling vortex of power. The world bled red, as towering monsters rampaged through ruined streets. A colossal eye opened in the sky, gazing down upon an army of shadow beasts. Among them loomed a horrifying, many-eyed entity. Then, the woman's face filled his vision, one eye glowing as she stared straight into his soul. He found himself before an overwhelming sea of blue. Energy, memory, and reality blurred together. Deep within his mind, a voice from a brilliant light told him he needed a name. A smiling figure from his past appeared, gently calling him Kay, and urging him to find his own color, his own light. The vision collapsed. Kay snapped back to reality with a sharp gasp, sweat pouring down his face. He staggered, clutching his head, as the after-images burned into his mind. He cursed it under his breath, unable to understand why such horrific memories were surfacing now. Desperate, he tried to hold on to the fragments before they faded. One name echoed clearly in his thoughts. Lumiel. Kay's brow furrowed in confusion, whispering the name aloud, unsure of who, or even what, it belonged to. Suddenly, Gale snaps, his control completely gone. The swordsman lets out a piercing scream into the darkness, wildly swinging his blade, as if battling phantoms only he can see. Kay turns alarmed and realizes Gale's wild attacks are coming dangerously close to Ellie. Ellie, who is crouched on the ground in terror. Gale continues to shout incoherently, utterly detached from reality, as Ellie trembles, begging him desperately to stop. Her desperate pleas are utterly ignored. His eyes are now pitch black, with blood leaking from their corners, the void itself driving him deeper into madness. Ellie fares no better. She clutches her head, with black tears streaming down her face, whispering apologies to her sister, while reliving a horrifying, painful memory. Kay watches the terrifying scene unfold, his expression darkening. He now understands. The very space itself is attacking their minds. If they linger any longer, both will be lost forever. But just then, a familiar chirping sound suddenly cuts through the absolute chaos. Kei looks up and sees a glowing, white figure racing urgently toward him. Relief washes over him as he instantly recognizes Nero. He quickly checks if the cat is unharmed. Nero circles him urgently, before pointing intently toward the distance, clearly trying to guide him to a specific spot. Understanding the signal, Kei prepares to follow. But then, he stops. Gale is still rampaging violently, and Ellie is barely conscious. Kei clenches his fists. He cannot abandon them now. Turning to Nero, he pleads for help. In response, a brilliant wave of pure, purifying light bursts outward from the cat, engulfing both Gale and Ellie in its glow. The black corruption evaporates instantly under the glow. Gale's screams fade, his sword dropping from his grasp, and Ellie's trembling slowly subsides as the oppressive darkness drains away. Kei exhales in profound relief. He tells them firmly to stay where they are, then turns back toward Nero, deciding to scout ahead, alone. He follows the glowing trail of light, lost in the endless darkness. His irritation mounts, as nothing ever changes. As if mocking him, the whispers return. A voice murmurs, "No color can reach this place." Kei clicks his tongue in annoyance, muttering, "Riddles are the worst." But then, he sees it. A distant, star-like glow pierces the void. Kei's irritation vanishes, replaced by pure excitement. He breaks into a run, and as he approaches, his breath catches. Before him stands a massive stone structure, crowned by a four-pointed star, radiating holy light. There's no doubt in his mind. This is the Stella fragment. He notices its shape and glow are unlike anything he'd ever imagined, briefly wondering if each fragment is different. Not wanting to waste time, he climbs the rocky base and reaches out. The moment his fingers touch it, the fragment reacts violently. Energy surges into his hand. As his absorption ability activates on its own, Kei gasps, his body glowing as power floods him. Panic flashes through his mind. He never intended to absorb it. He prays. The contact is brief enough not to cause problems. As the energy settles, the oppressive darkness collapses. The void peels away, revealing a vast chamber of gray stone. Kei stands alone at the center, staring at the light swirling in his hands. The black space is gone. He lets out a slow breath, reminding himself, the Black Lands never play by the rules. Behind him, Gale and Ellie regain consciousness. They stare at Kei as if he's a monster. Kei asks, "Are you alright?" But Gale only points at him in accusation. While Ellie demands to know how he remained unaffected, Kei answers honestly, "I don't know." He raises his hand, revealing the object. The swirling multicolored light confirms it. This is the Stella fragment. The three gather around it. Gale scoffs, unable to believe something so small caused so much trouble. Ellie, however, is awestruck, sensing countless colors within it. Nearby, Nero floats, eerily silent, his gaze locked on the fragment with intense focus. Kei checks himself over, confirming he feels perfectly fine. But Nero drifts closer, ever so slowly, his eyes fixated on the pulsating energy. Before anyone can even react, the cat opens his mouth incredibly wide and swallows the Stella fragment whole. Time itself seems to freeze. Kei's face twists in pure, unadulterated horror. Gale and Ellie scream in unison. Panic floods their voices as they stare wide-eyed at Nero, demanding to know just what kind of creature he truly is. Gale completely loses his temper, hovering in midair. The black cat is scolded mercilessly, as Gale shouts that the fragment is absolutely not food. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, he grabs Nero and shakes him violently, screaming for the creature to spit it out right now. Kei reacts instantly, shouting at Gale to let go of the cat, and lunging to pull him away from Nero. Before the argument can escalate any further, a sharp, ominous cracking sound echoes around them. Thin fractures begin to spread rapidly across the walls and ceiling. Gale curses bitterly, realizing that after everything they've been through, the entire place is collapsing on top of them. The chamber begins to violently cave in, as massive chunks of stone rain down. Seeing the imminent danger, Gale yells for everyone to move. Kei clutches Nero tightly and runs alongside Ellie. As the structure behind them crumbles to dust, they barely make it into the corridor, escaping just as the room collapses entirely. Elsewhere, a separate group of pioneers stands before the colossal corpse of an enormous monster. Arancia, the orange-haired leader, crouches near the battlefield, examining a deep gouge carved into the very ground. Her expression darkens as she traces the ominous mark with her eyes. A blue-haired subordinate asks if she's found something troubling. Rising to her feet, Arancia confirms grimly that the battle-mad lunatic has returned. She explains, that the traces belonged to a fearsome humanoid monster, known only as the Sword Demon, one of the Black Witch's infamous hands. Wherever it showed up, devastation always followed. She had a hunch that the recent surge in monster activity was far from coincidental. When asked if they should push forward, Arantia simply shook her head and commanded an immediate withdrawal. They'd already gathered enough vital materials, and she flat-out refused to gamble with the lives of their rookie pioneers. At that very moment, a terrifying wave of raw power erupted nearby. A colossal burst of searing crimson fire lit up a distant mountain peak. Arantia instantly froze, recognizing the terrifying color of those flames. Her eyes shot open in utter shock. Only one person could wield fire like that. If Red was using this much force, then the Sword Demon had to be nearby. Invisible slashes suddenly ripped through the air. Toward her team, Arantia reacted without hesitation, screaming for everyone to scatter, as a massive, razor-sharp cutting wave surged forward. Snatching her oversized mechanical hammer, now glowing with searing molten orange light, she soared into the air with a fierce roar. She slammed the hammer down. The collision of orange and black energies detonated in a violent, deafening explosion, completely nullifying the attack. Landing steadily, Arantia immediately ordered a full retreat. She then instructed her deputy to escort the team safely back to the outpost, while she herself went to rendezvous with Red. In the very next instant, she catapulted herself toward the blazing mountain. At the mountain peak, a cataclysmic duel was already unfolding. Red and black energies clashed relentlessly, violently, as Colorless Red and the fearsome Sword Demon moved faster than the eye could even follow. Their weapons clashed again and again, filling the air with devastating shockwaves. The demon conjured a massive, menacing spear of darkness, its single white eye burning with raw hostility, and hurled it forward. But Red blocked the attack head-on, twisting his body to skillfully redirect the force. The Sword Demon relentlessly pressed on, swinging a blade of shadows in a furious, relentless assault, while Red focused solely on defense. Suddenly, the demon sensed a profound danger. The ground erupted right beneath him, as a towering pillar of crimson flame burst upward. He managed to leap away just in time, narrowly avoiding the inferno. Through the roaring flames, his eye remained locked on Red. Then, a voice rang out from above, mocking Red for relying on bait tactics. Arantia then descended like a meteor, her hammer raised high, laughing wildly. She challenged the demon to dodge. Her hammer slammed down with overwhelming force, unleashing a devastating, orange shockwave that crushed the demon into the earth. As the dust settled, Arantia landed lightly. Red greeted her calmly, remarking that she was late. She joked that she nearly died getting there, but he brushed it off. She admitted that even her strike hadn't been enough to finish the job. Right on cue, the Sword Demon rose from the rubble, completely unharmed, glaring at them with murderous intent. Red remained confident, stating that fighting would be easier. Now that Arantia was fully using her color, she snapped back, warning him not to hold back, and adding that none of the other colorists wanted to witness his true power. Red complained about her nagging, but she ignored him, activating her ability. As glowing orange rings formed beneath her feet, gripping her hammer, she declared they would bring down another of the witches. Black hands. Across from them, the Sword Demon stood silently, fury swelling beneath his mask. Then, unexpectedly, strained voices echoed from a nearby cliff. Red's eyes widened, and even the demon paused in confusion. From above, Gale emerged over the ledge with Kay, Ellie, and Nero. Gale collapsed immediately, gasping that he never wanted to return to the underground ruins. Kay froze. A suffocating presence washed over him. He looked up and locked eyes with the Sword Demon. Behind the monster, Red and Arantia stood, glowing with power. Realizing they had stumbled into an active battlefield, Kay's blood ran cold. Red and Arantia let out a string of curses under their breath, and surged forward, yelling for the trio to clear the path. The Sword Demon, however, utterly ignored them. His menacing gaze locked onto the most vulnerable targets. In a flash, he charged straight for Kay, Gale and Ellie. Driven by raw instinct, Gale raised his sword, and Ellie swiftly drew her weapon. Despite their exhaustion, the demon swung just once. Both weapons instantly shattered, reduced to mere fragments. Gale stared in utter disbelief, as his reinforced blade snapped like brittle glass. Terror seized him. This was an enemy far beyond their wildest nightmares. The Sword Demon raised his weapon once more. A searing blade of white energy ripped through the air. Without a second thought, Kay threw himself forward, his body shielding his teammates. The slash came down cleanly, severing his left hand in an instant. Pain exploded through his body as he violently collapsed backward. Ellie shrieked his name, and Gale roared in horror. The demon pressed his brutal advantage. He slammed his knee into Gale's gut, sending him crashing violently aside. Then, he seized Ellie by the throat, effortlessly lifting her off the ground, using her cruelly as a human shield. Red and Arancia arrived, but were tragically too late to intervene. The sword demon immediately ordered them to halt, demanding a clear, unobstructed path, and grimly warning he would kill the girl if they dared to follow. He then demanded they hand over the key, leaving the colorist reeling in shock. Arancia roared back in absolute fury, demanding to know what on earth he was talking about, while Red narrowed his eyes, carefully weighing the perilous situation. Nearby, Kay lay face down, utterly submerged in a pool of his own blood. Nero hovered above him, desperately crying out. Then, against all odds, Kay's remaining hand twitched. Slowly, incredibly, he began to rise. A chilling, oppressive pressure began to spread across the battlefield. The sword demon felt it, and turned sharply, a flicker of confusion flashing across his face. He stared, utterly transfixed, at Kay's silhouette, utterly unable to comprehend what he was witnessing. Black energy surged violently, explosively, around Kay's body. The darkness condensed tightly around his severed wrist, and before anyone could even react, a brand new arm began to form, entirely composed of swirling, writhing black power. Kay stood perfectly upright, his features lost in shadow. From him radiated an overwhelming, crushing aura. An aura that caused even the sword demon to hesitate.